The various attacks against Tesla, both around the world and in the United States, reflect a certain ideological disposition that is going unrecognized by most people as they seek to grapple with this spate of domestic terrorism and its horrific effects to civil society. And in order to really be able to grapple with this effectively and to stop it, we must understand where it comes from, and we must understand the logic behind these kinds of actions. So in this video, we're going to explore the ideological roots of the recent spate of left-wing domestic terrorism relating to Tesla and other matters. And we're going to go into how this justifies itself and what we as thinking people, we as those who wish to preserve civilization and wish to preserve, especially here in America, our republican system of governance, can do to effectively contend and beat these ideologies. But before we venture into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with the philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure our message is successful. I do believe that we have something that is very special. I do believe that we have something that will allow a lot of people to have a different, fresh perspective on what is going on today. And I do believe as well, if you are a patriot and you love this country, and this is the channel where you want to be, so you can grow in your knowledge of why the American ethos is so grand. So if these things sound good to you, again, like, share, comment, subscribe. If you would like to go to the extra mile, no obligation, but if you'd like to, you can also donate to me as well on the many links that we have down below for you to contribute. Thank you so much for your contributions, for your likes, your subscriptions, and your comments. Now, please enjoy the video. So, as I mentioned, a spate of attacks have happened ever since Elon Musk took a very domineering position within the Trump administration to advise him on how to cut government waste and to advise him on the other activities of DOGE. For example, Tesla showrooms across America have been vandalized, have been stormed by protesters. People, innocent folks who are simply just driving Teslas in their everyday lives, have been boxed in by cars like what happened in Arizona and physically assaulted merely for driving Teslas. They have been left with threatening notes on their Teslas when they come back from grocery stores. Tesla charging centers have been firebombed. There's been a wide variety of things happening, not just in the United States, but also across the world, in Australia and Sweden and in so many other countries. This sort of Tesla takedown movement, which is the official movement that launched hundreds of protests across America, over 200, just to protest Tesla. This is the kind of tactics that are being undertaken here. And many people are responding to these tactics by simply saying it is merely domestic terrorism. But it most certainly is that. By saying that and leaving the conversation there, you are cheapening the significance of the phenomenon actually happen. This goes far beyond domestic terrorism. This goes far beyond mindless violence. This goes far beyond even the mob mentality. I made a video a few months ago about how after President Trump won, how the problem of mobocracy would beset Western civilization. What I meant in that video was that you would no longer see a kind of engagement with the rule of law or the engagement of the civil processes of political engagement. You would see mobs begin to form to intimidate, coerce, and influence the trajectory of political order, and that would become this sort of character, we'll call it the character of our age. You're seeing that here, but you're also seeing reflected in these attacks a more sinister worldview that it will take a sort of philosophical exploration for us to truly understand. And we can begin this exploration by looking at one of the mantras of the Tesla takedown movement and realizing that this goes far beyond Tesla, and Tesla is simply a microcosm of the broader worldview that is being reflected here. There is a single mantra that kind of defines this movement that has been plastered upon poster board signs at protest and uttered from the mouths of activists who are undertaking these kinds of coercive behaviors, and that is the phrase, "Kill Tesla." Now, it is very rare that in one single phrase you can rebuke every single virtue of civilization and embrace its antithesis. Kill Tesla in one phrase simply sums up the antithesis of civilization. It reflects a sort of resentment towards property and creativity, both of which actually birthed society because they are associated with somebody who is considered to be undesirable by people of a certain worldview. They are associated with someone who seems to be a controversial figure. And the fact that Kill Tesla is being used as a proxy of getting at Elon Musk, because these same activists have said that the way to stop Elon Musk is to hurt Tesla, demonstrates a confusion between the eternal and the local. Demonstrates a confusion between being able to recognize a thing in general, being able to recognize principles, and being able to see how things may manifest within our society independent of those general realities. It demonstrates a confusion, an unwillingness to recognize the difference of both, confusing both and believing that both are one and the same when in all reality they are not. This encourages poor reasoning and primality over substantive engagements with ideas. If everything is merely an offshoot of a sort of materialistic calculus, which is exactly what this movement is based upon, then this violent behavior has no moral limitation. And that actually is what's going on here. The anti-Tesla movement reflects a certain attitude towards property that is very important to understand. When the progressive era started, because a lot of radical left-wing ideologies, if they are not explicitly socialist, but even if they are socialists, reflect particular philosophies, some of which were birthed during the sort of outer reaches of the Enlightenment, and others of which were birthed from the era of reform, the early 20th century, the progressive era, where European ideas were imported into America, and American conceptions were replaced by European notions of ideas. And during the era of reform, the progressive era they call it, there was this idea surrounding property, surrounding society, and surrounding good governance, in the words of the progressives, that colored how they saw private property in its relationship with politics. There are two thinkers, particularly during this era. Richard T. Ely, who was a major economist who actually helped many of these sort of progressive era economic reforms come into fruition, and Herbert Crowley, who was a publisher, a very influential public intellectual, who also was a big engine of the progressive movement. And they both had things to say about property that are distinctively against the notion of property that most Americans have. But if their views are taken seriously and they are endorsed, then you can easily justify the atrocities happening towards Tesla. So, for example, in his writing, Property and Contract, Richard T. Ely blatantly said that private property was created for social purposes. He also used the word for the general welfare. He believed that private property should not be used for private interest, as in it should not be used to further the lives of somebody who may own the property. It should instead be bound towards the dictates and the needs of the broader society. Herbert Crowley posed this sort of dichotomy between equal rights and equal opportunity, and he said, in a society where private property is held as sacred, rights exist, but equal opportunity cannot exist, and therefore we have to have a view of property that subordinates it towards the social will. Within both of these two viewpoints, the idea of property is colored by three core principles. Number one, it is colored by this idea that they believe property should be socialized. Note, this is not socialism. Socialism takes private property as a possibility away and puts it within the hands of the community. Whereas the progressive idea simply says, no, individual ownership is fine, but how you use what you own is a matter of social import, and we will regulate it and we will attach a moral emphasis upon it so that if you use it in a way we don't like, you will be shamed and you will be considered to be a criminal. That is what's going on here. That's the socialization of property, to use property for ends that they believe will benefit society. Equal opportunity over equal rights, ensuring that people have more resources as opposed to having an equal ability to get resources, and having a cooperative mentality over a competitive mentality. In fact, Herbert Crowley himself said, quote, "It should be the effort of all civilized societies to substitute the cooperative for competitive method." So, if private property, as the progressives argued, is merely a product of social needs, if it should be subordinated to social needs, and there is nothing sacred about it, there's nothing about it that goes beyond the immediate interest of society, the sort of utilitarian idea, then you can justify the destruction of private property if it then therefore devolves from what the society deems as meeting its needs. This is precisely what is happening with the Tesla takedown movement. Not only are they confusing Tesla as a general idea with Elon Musk, its creator, therefore demonstrating an inability to distinguish between concepts, which is a kind of primitive thinking that completely blocks you from being able to engage with ideas, as I mentioned. But they also view that Tesla owners, by virtue of being in the society, have some obligation to fulfill some hidden or unspoken contract that is suggested by their view of society, which then therefore allows them to go ahead and use violence because, again, they view their actions, the actions of these property owners, as something amounting a moral kind of wrong or violence due to them not towing the line of what they think is needed for society. This is how this all comes into play, my friends. And if you study the progressive notion of good governance, which was articulated by Woodrow Wilson and many others, you will also see the kind of three different things that seem to also buttress this notion around property that we're seeing play out here on the streets. The progressive notion of good governance, for example, holds that majority will is embodied within the chief executive, and that, again, there should be an emphasis over cooperation over competition, and that social responsibility should be the dominant standard over personal interests. So when you have this particular idea of property, I call it the uber social idea of property, and you view property not as the beginning of society, not as the assurer of just social relationships, because when I own something, I can therefore put limits upon somebody else to respect what I own, and therefore those limits can regulate social relationships. If you view property instead as produced by those relationships and not as the source of them, you can then therefore use the idea of property to manipulate society according to your whim. This is the tyrannical assumption behind the Tesla takedown movement. This is the tyrannical assumption behind the kill Tesla phrase, and this is precisely what we are dealing in our current age of mobocracy. My friends, this goes way beyond domestic terrorism. This goes way beyond merely hating Elon Musk. This goes way beyond insanity. And I heard Elon say this is just insanity. This goes way beyond any of this. This is a separate vision of civilization, which views property and the individual as creations of civilization and not as the originators of civilization, and seeks to make anybody who falls outside of that broken ethos a slave, a complete and utter servant to that dominant idea. It is a totalizing notion of man standing in society. It is a totalizing notion of his ability to own things and to use his volition to then use what he owns to create value, so on and so forth. And it completely says, no, there is this vacuum that you are sucked into that you must serve as opposed to your personal interest. At the root of all of this, my friends, is a great moral evil. A great moral evil that attempts to say that benevolence is more important than ethics. A great moral evil that attempts to say that outrage is a fine standard by which to govern or correct perceived social wrongs as opposed to discussion. A great moral evil which supposes to say that you can reduce ideas to people and people to ideas without actually understanding the distinction between either of those. That is what is happening here in these attacks, my friends. Because there's absolutely no other justification for going after old women in Arizona simply for driving a car. So, my friends, what do? What we do is very simple. We must recognize the roots of this. We must call out the broken worldview, that property is subordinate to society as opposed to society to being subordinate with respect for property. And we must stalwartly defend the right of people to believe as they believe, to use their resources as they want to use their resources within moral constraints, and condemn the mobocratic barbarians who then therefore seek to violate those constraints and remake civilization within their own image. Once this is done, my friends, I believe that the Tesla takedown movement and any other anterior movement that seeks to subvert civilization and turn on top of its head and endorse this sort of communitarian collectivist view of property ownership and existence within society, I believe we will vanquish them and they will be defeated. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can. Study history, study philosophy, remain more convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.